Hello tomato growers, this is Ray Kruse, your tomato growing mentor. And today is an exciting day. We have worked hard to get our transplants established and we're ready to move them out into the garden. Now, to start things off, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our tillage bed. So it's really wet out right now, but I have to get this information out to you, so we're going to do our best to demo this right here. Being that it is so wet, I couldn't run the tiller back through my garden again. This area of the garden was tilled earlier this year, and you can see all the little crabgrass and foxtails starting to just create a mat, along with the carrots and onions and everything. And we want our tomatoes to be off to a fresh start. So what we do is, I came through with the hoe yesterday and just did a real shallow weeding yesterday to knock back those weeds, and you can see some of their root hairs and things like that all exposed. Hopefully this one will probably survive here, but we've knocked back a lot of them and set this back to a clean slate so that our tomatoes have a better chance of thriving without any weeds around them. Now, coming over here to our tomatoes, we've tried to select transplants here that are healthy, and with the hardening off process, things were a little bit difficult, as you know, but we're trying our best here. This is what we have, and we're going to move forward with it. When it comes to trying to manage disease, this is a really important time when trying to manage the foliar diseases that we get later in the season. I have a flag here representing where each one of the tomatoes are going to be planted here, and we're going to be about 3 feet apart here in row, and our rows are going to be 6 feet apart to our potatoes, which are the far row over there, and they're kind of looking a little weedy already. In between, 3 feet away, we have a row of onions and carrots, and mid-season they'll be gone. So we'll actually have 6 feet a row later in the year between our potatoes and our tomatoes here, where we'll have a lot of airflow and try and reduce the amount of stagnant air around our tomatoes when it's humid and hot out, and that helps reduce the amount of disease that can thrive on those leaves by trying to get the air moving through them. So we've placed our tomatoes quite far apart here. Some of our commercial growers will go as close as 18 inches, but here we're only going 3 feet apart within the row and trying to maintain a row spacing of about 6 feet with other plants. But like I said, we have some shorter season plants in here that are going to leave later in the year. For starting to transplant, I'm just going to remove our little flag here representing where our tomato is going to go. And we're just going to dig down to about the depth of our tomato rooting cell here. Like I said, this is really muddy out here. Not optimal, but trying my best here to help everybody out and providing information in a timely fashion. So you can see here we have our transplant cell. It's about 1.5 inches deep. We can actually plant our tomatoes. Tomatoes are one of the few plants that you can plant deep and still be okay. And so you can see here on this tomato plant, we have some adventitious roots here, and those will take off as soon as we get those into the ground. So we're actually going to plant this tomato just a little bit deep. It'll help with wind and things like that. It won't flop around and things like that once we get it planted. So we'll take this, sprinkle a little bit of soil in there around the base of our transplant. And when transplanting our tomatoes into the garden, it's really essential that we give them some water in the hole. If we were planting container tomatoes, it's okay to water them afterwards because we usually give the entire container a large soaking dose for the first time. But for our tomatoes going into the garden, it's good to get the water right down by the root zone. So we're going to give them a little bit of water, and you can see here that I'm just using my quick start fertilizer. They are looking a little bit nitrogen deficient here. I don't know if you can see, but we got some yellow leaves here, and this is indicating that they're lacking a little bit in nitrogen. So we're going to give them just a little shot of fertilizer here to get them started. So I just took the starter fertilizer from the house and just brought that out here and just used it for this purpose. So what we're going to do is we're now going to cover them up here. It's a little harder to do with one hand. Now, being that the soil is wet and heavy right now, we're planting into a silt loam here, which is like a lot of the soils around Dubuque. We're just going to tap that just a little bit. We don't really want to press that tomato in there, but there we have it. We have a perfectly transplanted tomato right there. And we're going to continue this for the rest of our transplants that we've started, but we're not done yet. So one other thing that I would like to encourage you to think about is that a lot of times our foliar diseases of our tomatoes here will actually get some of their inoculum, or germs if you want to call them, splashed up from the soil onto the leaves. And we want to help discourage that. And one way to do that is to provide them with mulch. And you can see here, this is just a bale of hay. Optimally, I like to use hay or grass clippings because this green material here provides nitrogen throughout the season for our transplants. And I don't really have to worry about fertilizing them anymore from here on out. As this degrades and the soil microbes eat it, it gives a lot of the nitrogen that's in this material to those plants. And the same thing would go for grass clippings. However, if you are using grass clippings, I will say that you want to avoid using grass clippings that have been sprayed with dandelion killer, because 2,4-D, which is common in dandelion killer, tomatoes are very, very sensitive to that. So if you pick up those grass clippings from your lawn sprayed for dandelions, you can very well injure your tomatoes. They might not grow. But what we'll do is we'll place this mulch here right around the base of the plant. And I'm typically aiming for a compacted amount of mulch that's anywhere between 2 and 4 inches deep. So I'm going to be really generous here with this at the start of the season to make sure that my tomatoes are tucked in really nicely here. Get the leaves out there. And we'll continue this. I'll actually do this between the rows here for the rest of the garden as well, because I've just found out that I never have to weed from this point forward, and which is very, very nice and handy once it gets hot out, and it also makes for a nice environment to walk on. You can also mulch with straw or leaf mold. Leaf mold is probably better because it's probably a little bit more decomposed. Straw is good too if it's weed-free. However, I will say you might have to consider supplementing with some more fertilizer later in the year, because straw can actually steal away some of our nutrients from the plants, but there's still a lot of people that use it, and it's still a really successful mulching material. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue planting down the row here, and I'll join you right back here once I get that completed. And we're back. We have completed the planting of our tomatoes here in the garden. We have planted them 3 feet apart, and then 18 inches, or halfway between the tomatoes, we have planted some marigolds in there. We talked about why we were going to plant those earlier this year. So we have first our hybrid tomatoes, and now we have our heirloom tomatoes here. And we've mulched them with a good 2 to 4 inch thick layer of hay mulch around the tomatoes here, and we're pretty much done for weeding this year now. We might have to touch up that mulch a little later this year. At the end of the row here, we have this one lonely tomato, and what we're going to do here is we're going to give this tomato lots and lots of fertilizer and just see what happens. So with that, thanks for joining me for tomato growing update number 4. Hello tomato growers, this is Ray Kruse, your tomato growing mentor. Today we are talking about the results of our lighting experiment that we started earlier this year when we seeded our tomatoes. You might remember we had a low light scenario where we seeded some tomato seeds underneath just a sunny south window. We also had a medium light environment where we seeded some tomato seeds under 2 fluorescent bulbs hanging directly above the seed bed in the house. And we also have this highlight environment where we had multiple high power LEDs pumping tons of sunshine down at these tomato plants here. And you can see the result here. It's quite stunning, the difference between the 3 environments. We'll start off here with the low light environment here, and you can see we have a little bit shorter of a plant, but still this is very acceptable for a transplant going in the garden. We do have a little bit less root growth here. In fact, I had some troubles trying to get it out of the transplant cell. These are hardened off transplants, and prior to last week, these were looking a lot better than they do now, but now that they've all gone through the hardening off process, this may even be the most acceptable transplant we have here, just for as short, stocky as it is, and relatively healthy looking as it's looking. Here we're going to the medium lighted environment with the 2 fluorescent bulbs. And you can see we had a lot more stem growth here, and this isn't always favorable, but if we're looking for, if they weren't as crowded maybe underneath the light or outside, we weren't dealing with as many stressful conditions as what we were dealing with the past week and trying to harden them off, maybe they wouldn't have elongated quite like they are now. But still an acceptable transplant. We have a little bit more root growth, a little bit more foliar growth. Still a great specimen. Over here we have our highlight environment. You can see we do have some additional root growth. We have a lot more foliar growth. However, this plant may have dealt with the hardening off process maybe a little better compared to the other transplants that we have here, but we didn't come by or get out of the situation without any scars. And we have some leaf damage here, and I'm not sure yet if this is the start of any foliar disease. I really hope not, but I'm not seeing the rings that I typically see for foliar disease, so we'll see. We'll let time tell. But otherwise, they're all looking relatively good for transplants coming out of the house, going into the garden, and for being hardened off. So outside of last week where they were looking floppy and things like that, we've had a lot of leaves that have dried up and fallen off. You know, this is an example of what we may have seen, and that leaf eventually just will dry up and fall off, and that's what's happened with these over here. But we do have a little bit of new growth coming on, and they have now completed the hardening off process, and we're looking to plant them today. So